Welcome back to 755 Forever. I'm David O'Brien, Braves writer at The Athletic. I'm with my co-host, as usual, former Braves reliever Eric O'Flaherty. What's happening, Eric?
Not much, Dave. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. It was a eventful weekend for the Braves, and ultimately with the best ending I think they could possibly have. You don't want to oversell it, but, I mean, because as it turns out, it seems like right now Ronald Acuña only has some irritation of the meniscus, which, if that's all it is, that's not a big deal. But it was potentially a devastating blow because we've talked about how really, I don't think they can afford to lose any of their major guys, your Matt Olsons, your Austin Rileys. But you could argue that no team would miss a player more than the Braves would miss Acuña. And I know they won the World Series in 21 without him, but this is a different Ronald Acuña, the one that we saw last year. That team last year without Ronald Acuña wins maybe 10 games less. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, he won the MVP for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. A unanimous MVP. So this was a huge deal, a huge relief for the Braves to find out today. They sent Acuña was scratched from the lineup Friday. For those who might not have been aware, I'm sure everybody is right now. And, because it's Acuña, because he's got a surgically repaired knee, they flew him out to visit with his surgeon. And I know some people might not be aware of that, but that's kind of become the practice when somebody other than a team doctor does the surgery, which is most of the time. They like to send the player to the guy who did the surgery because he's familiar. Like Soroka went up to the Green Bay Clinic each time he had problems with his Achilles. And guys who get Tommy John usually go back to their doctor for the checkup. The surgeon who's familiar with the work that was done. And they wanted a second opinion to make sure the Braves doctor's diagnosis of irritation of meniscus, that's all it was. And Elatrosh, who's a preeminent guy now, like Job used to be, said, that's it. That's all it was. And I mean, it could have been, even if it was just something like, say, torn meniscus or a flap of meniscus, they might have had to go in with a scope. And then you're talking about a month or 6 weeks of rest and rehab, and you're talking about starting a season on the IL. And
unless you're Chipper. Chipper came back in like 3 weeks, didn't even rehab it.
Chipper's game wasn't based on explosiveness at that point of his career, especially.
Yeah.
It was all skill, man.
Yeah, I didn't really get too alarmed by it. They pretty much, you got to think the surgeon got that. He's the one that operated on him in the first place because he's the best. So you get your initial opinion kind of so everybody can just get a gauge on it and see, what are we dealing with here? Is this a big deal or not? And then you want that second opinion from the guy that is the best and got to do the surgery because he's the best, and his opinion is probably the best. So it's like you send him to him, and it's a small amount of money for a team and a player that you have that much invested in. I think almost any team would do that.
Right. The fact that they did it in the middle of spring training told me, okay, there's at least in the back of the, and Snit said, he's trying to remain optimistic on Saturday, but until they sees the doctor. So that told me, okay, I'm like you. I thought it was okay. It was probably nothing, but there's always that doubt in the back of your mind, especially when it's a guy whose game is so based on, like I said, explosiveness. I mean, still 73, led the majors in stolen bases by a wide margin last year, but just about everything he does is geared on explosiveness. And we saw what happened in 2022 when he had soreness and stiffness and had to get it drained a few times, how it affected his power because he wasn't confident and couldn't feel like he could rotate on that knee. So there's a lot that everything, his whole game really has to be generated by what he does with his hips and legs and knees.
Yeah, and I think everybody in baseball, once you've been in the game a while, you kind of get to the point where you don't want an MRI because of the odds of finding something. There's a lot of things that could be kind of dormant. He could have had some flap in his meniscus that he didn't even feel. And then you take that MRI, you get those images, and they're like, there's this problem. So anytime you open up a joint or take pictures of it, you might find something unrelated. So anytime a guy's going and getting scans done or seeing a doctor like that, it definitely makes you nervous, especially when he's as valuable as Ronald.
Yeah, and I figured he probably gave him a couple more sophisticated tests too, scans like a CT scan or whatever that could see some things that maybe the MRI wouldn't, just to make sure. But anyway, they got the report back. He went on Saturday or Sunday, but they couldn't get him in, obviously, until Monday. And 3 hours behind, so it was probably late in the day. So they didn't release the thing until early this morning. So a lot of Braves fans were on pins and needles. He's the most popular player on the team, arguably the most popular player in the sport, him and Ohtani. And a lot of not just Braves fans, but a lot of Acuña fans were, worried because you see a season like he had last year, a magical season, and you wonder how far can he go? What more can he do?
What's the encore going to look like?
And all of a sudden you're tempering that going, okay, well, the 50 stolen bases he's out the window. He's not going to run that much and all that. You start to worry like that. So you just don't want to see him diminished in any way, So he was at camp today and no limp or anything, said he felt great. No easing back into baseball activities right away. They'll be careful with him because he doesn't need 50, 60 ABs. I would say if he doesn't play in games until the last 10 days or so, he'll be fine for opening day. He could take live BP and hit in the cage and all that kind of thing. But they'll be careful to make sure.
Yeah, it's the difference in the value of the player too. He might have just gone in there and said it was a little stiff, and then the team's going to be so cautious with him. Versus if it's like a non-roster invite, they're just going to throw ice on it and tell him to cross his fingers.
Sure. Because
of the value of Ronald, like they're going to take every precaution you can. You played winter ball, so he's in shape and ready. Spring training doesn't nearly have as much value for a guy that already played all that winter ball and has been doing everything. I think he'll be good to go, and they'll just be super cautious with it, and it won't be a big deal at all.
We'll talk a little bit about winter ball here before we move on to another subject. But first, I want to read this. We got a great new sponsor. Appropriately enough, it's coffee, which, as everyone knows, keeps me going and keeps Eric going. But I'm an addict. Give some support to our new sponsor, official coffee of the 755 Forever podcast. Getting ready for a day game after a night game for a player, I especially older players, all suck down coffee. And a lot of the new ones drink energy drinks, Red Bull, all that. But I know I need a lot of coffee covering a day game after a night game. And a good cup, 2 or 3. It's a great way to start. And Joe Van Gogh Coffee suggests blend number 44. So named in remembrance of our man, Hall of Famer, the legend, Hank Aaron, our show's namesake, 755. What better brew to pour into your 755 Forever mug? Have you seen those? Those are pretty cool. Than a coffee honoring Hammer and Hank, who hit 755 big league homers, of course. For a limited time, if you subscribe to a 6-month coffee subscription and enter the word Hammer, you will receive a 755 Forever coffee mug and a bag of coffee honoring the home run king. That's a pretty cool deal, man. I didn't even realize that. Joe Van Gogh has been roasting and serving coffee for 30 years and following the Braves through each and every one of them. Visit joevangogh.com. That's JoeVangogh.com. That's joevangogh.com to get your wake-up call in time for opening day. There you go. Our first big sponsor, along with our Blue Wire national sponsors. We appreciate it, everybody. You mentioned winter ball. I know a lot of people, and I understand, you want to point a finger, you want to say, how can we prevent this? What's the cause of this? A lot of the cause of it is just an athlete. Athletes get hurt, man. To me, I know that people don't like to pinpoint one thing, but to me, when I saw the highlights of the game on Thursday, when he got caught in the rundown between second and third, I winced. Because that's exactly what you don't want to see a guy who's had knee problems do. Lateral movement is where guys who do have ACL, that's where that problem is, lateral movement. They can run straight ahead. A lot of times they can keep playing with a partial tear of it, but they put a brace on, but it's the lateral movement. So even though he's fully healthy, he got in a rundown, which, I know he's just competitive. He's out having fun. He's trying to avoid, but he should have just stopped and said, okay, take the out. And he didn't just get in a rundown, but it was like an extended one. Each time he's planting that knee. If anybody is wondering what we're talking about, stand up and plant your knee hard to the side. Nothing hurts your knee, the cartilage in a knee, more than doing that. And he did it, and it's probably hard spring training field that's not as groomed as the regular fields are, not as soft. He did that like 4 times. He planted. And felt soreness after that. Next day, it was still there. To me, it's all about that and not about playing winter ball is the reason why his knee, he irritated the meniscus. Am I a doctor? No. Do I know that for sure? No. But to me, that's what did it. And that's where you got to be a little smarter. Avoid those. And even during a regular season game, I'd tell him, Ronald, I know you want to get out of those rundowns or extend them and let your guy, because it's smart baseball to let your guy take the extra base. But if I'm the manager of Ronald Acuña, I'm telling him, spring training game, do not do that.
Yeah, I don't know if he can shut that off, though.
I know.
Like, he's just playing a kid's game out there.
Yeah. You almost never avoid the tag, though. Almost never.
Never. You never get out of them. But, I mean, it's like renting a 23-year-old a Ferrari for the day and telling him to go the speed limit. You know, like when it feels that good to move, I don't know if you could stop anybody from just flooring it all the time. And I think he does have to learn that. And I don't know about the winter ball thing. I mean, some guys do it, and it's pretty normal that a lot of guys do it for at least part of the season. And if you get hurt there, it's a big deal. But I don't think that it kind of accumulates or piles up. Or, I mean, you're more likely to get hurt showing up to spring training, having not been playing and not been moving. That's what happens is those first 2 weeks of spring training when guys – or the first time they try to beat out a ground ball. Like, so he's kind of already broken that in. I don't get worked up over the winter ball thing at all.
Yeah, we've seen that so many times. You saw it with your fellow players, and I don't know how many times I've covered a guy, especially pitchers, when they ramp up, the shoulder or the elbow starts barking, but also position players, hamstrings, calves, who haven't run all season. They might have done some jogging or some half-ass sprints, but not many guys do. And then they get there and they're running full tilt, and all of a sudden the hamstring's sore.
Everything's in a controlled environment. You know, with your training, you really can't replicate like changing directions in a rundown, or actually going and catching the ball and needing to catch it and hitting that extra gear. You know, you just don't practice that stuff in the offseason. So that's when you see guys get hurt, when they first get there.
And the other thing, we're talking about Ronald being competitive. It hit back in his mind. He's so talented. He probably thinks he will get out of that rundown this time, that he's so fast.
Every time.
And that he'll wear those guys out, duck under it. He's so athletic. But, yeah, you were talking about winter ball. It's not done as much now as it used to be. But before 9/11, before the pandemic, before all this stuff happened, and it was easier to travel, and there weren't kidnappings in Venezuela like there have been in the last couple of decades, a lot of foreign players used to go home to play. Puerto Rican League, when it was big, Javi Lopez used to go home and play. I mean, there were all-stars. It was common for them to go home and play in Puerto Rico, the Dominican, Venezuela. And a lot of times they were doing it, especially in Puerto Rico, on shitty artificial turf fields, man, that were like the worst of the major league fields back in the day. And they go play in winter ball because it meant a lot to their people back home, like Ronald has said. A lot of times it's the only chance my family and friends, especially his friends, get to see him play in person.
Yeah, and you don't want him to see you playing at 60%, you know, so that's where it gets a little tricky. You know, when you're that valuable to an organization, you have that contract. I understand teams that are concerned. I definitely would ask my guy, like, hey, you know, maybe don't do it, but I think it's really important to the player himself, and you can't tell him what to do. But what I don't understand or don't know is the contract. If you were to get hurt, how it affects your major league contract.
I don't think it's like things that are in your contract, like motorcycle riding, skiing, that kind of thing. I don't think that's in there. And when the team approves of you going down there, which they have to do, and they did Ronald.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They couldn't stop paying you. I'm certain of that. But the guy I was trying to remember, besides Javi Lopez, I went down to cover some Marlins prospects a couple of decades ago when I was covering the Marlins. And they'd send everybody down to Puerto Rico. They play at Ponce, which is on the other side of the island. So you land in San Juan, drive over the island. It's beautiful. But they played on this crappy artificial turf field. And I go down there in a couple of games I went to, Javi Lopez was playing. Roberto Alomar was playing when he was maybe the best second baseman in baseball. And those places were packed to see these guys play. So the local owners appreciated those guys being there. They gave them a little money. Those guys could make a little money, but that's not why they did it. They did it because their fans were down there, the ones that were there when they were coming up. So, and that's the way it is in Dominican and Venezuela. They stopped letting guys go to Venezuela for a while because so many guys, superstars, were getting kidnapped, you know.
Or their family members.
Right. They know exactly how much money you make. I mean, a guy like Ronald Acuña, they know how much money they make. But I think he plays for a team that's in a relatively small town. It's not in Caracas and that kind of thing. And I'm sure they have security around them and all that. But, I mean, initially, teams weren't letting guys go play in Venezuela for a while there. Not at all because of the number of kidnappings. So I forgot who the one catcher was that got kidnapped.
And we're learning new details about the dramatic rescue of Washington Nationals catcher Wilson Ramos. He was freed from kidnappers Saturday following a 2-day hostage ordeal.
Prado used to tell me that he would buy clothes. He'd buy an outfit at Walmart and get it real dirty and then wash it without detergent. And he'd fly in his normal clothes. And when he landed in Venezuela, he'd change his clothes. So he didn't look like he had money or anything like that, just to try to be safer.
Other thing that's worth pointing out about Acuña in winter ball this year, people act like he played the whole winter. He didn't. He started playing in December, mid-December, and he stopped playing in mid-January because he came back to the U.S. He had all those banquets for the MVP and all that, and he went to Braves Fest, and he flew straight from Braves Fest to New York for the BBWA thing to get his MVP. So, I mean, he played for a month, and I think that's, to me, if you stop in mid-January, that's a whole month to rest before spring training starts. So I'm not going to put that. I don't see where that would have affected this at all. And he was running fine in the first 2-3 weeks that he was down at camp. It wasn't until after that rundown that he was feeling any pain at all.
Yeah, I mean, he just pissed his knee off in a rundown. He had a surgically repaired knee that
on a hard field, spring training field.
Maybe the one thing you'd really be concerned about is like a starting pitcher that threw 220 innings or something, going straight down there and piling up like 40 or 50 more. Pitchers I would definitely be more concerned about because pretty much everybody believes you only got so many bullets, so you're kind of wasting them down there. But I mean, he's just staying in shape.
Harold Reynolds pointed out something, and I know a lot of fans are feeding off this. He pointed out how many games he had played. It was like in a 650-day span or whatever. And the number was like 300. It was like basically a game every other day, 330 games, something like that. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, it sounds a lot, but there are a lot of guys that play more games than that. Guys like Olsen who play 160 to 62 games a year. Then guys who play 15 to 20 games in a postseason. Then guys who play 20 games in spring training. That's not an uncommon amount. The amount now, yeah, Acuña did it after coming back from the knee surgery, but he was a year removed from the knee surgery. The Braves were pretty cautious with him in that they brought him back a little faster than they initially planned in knee surgery in 2022. And he had problems with it, had to give it drains, normal kind of stuff. They said, you're not going to re-injure it, but you're going to have some pain. And he did, stiffness. But he didn't play like every game that year at all. It was a bad year, normal year to come back from knee surgery. But he's a year, 2 years removed from that when he's playing that, which to me, it didn't seem like an unusual amount of games. Played like 25 or 20 games down in winter ball. And he plays like most Braves regulars. They don't play as much as a lot of teams. SNIT doesn't make them do road trips and that kind of thing. And they only get a couple of at-bats early in the season in home games. So I didn't think that what Harold said was really a problem for a young player a year removed from the knee surgery. And if it was, I'd say it. I thought they brought him back, when they brought him back like maybe 3 weeks before they had intended to. And also they shucked their plan, which was not to play him in day games after night games, not to play. They had all this plan in place and they started slow. They rushed him back and all of a sudden he's playing in the outfield, playing backed-to-back games day after day, all that. I thought maybe they could have been a little more careful than that, but ultimately he didn't re-injure the knee. He just struggled most of that year, with soreness and everything. But at this point, this far removed from it, I don't have a problem with Ronald Acuña playing 150 to 160 regular season games and 20 games of winter ball. I mean, at his age, I just don't think it's a problem. I just think he's got to be a little smarter, if he could do that, if it's possible.
I'd definitely, if I was a GM, I'd sleep better if my guy wasn't out there.
Right, if he wasn't playing.
In games that don't matter to me. But at the same time, I don't think it's a huge issue.
Right. And the other thing is you want the guy to be happy. If he wants to play down there, because he's probably not going to want to play down there for his whole career. He's still young and he loves playing every day. But, he didn't play down there after the year after knee surgery. Then they limited him to DH and playing just a couple of games in the field when he played there a year ago winter. So now he's healed. He's an MVP. Are you going to tell him, no, you can't play winter ball and piss him off?
But he's 24, right?
25.
Okay, what do you think about what do you think a 25-year-old is doing with $100 million in the bank if he doesn't have a game tomorrow?
Right. Exactly.
Like there's a lot worse stuff you can be doing to staying in shape playing baseball, especially in a country where you're a god. You can get into a lot worse trouble and find a lot more damaging things to do to your system. I mean, that's one of the ways I look at it is like when I retired, my dad asked me if I wanted a beer, and I started, coming up with my excuses why I couldn't. And if there was all this pressure anytime I thought about doing anything that was not good for my health.
Right.
During my playing career. And my dad asked me if I wanted a beer, and I thought about it. I was like, shit, I want 12. I don't have a game tomorrow. I don't have a game after that. I don't have anything. So when you have all this time on your hands, like, oh, I'm just taking a month to screw off. I mean, guys will sit on the couch and just get blasted for a month straight, and then they put themselves way behind. At least he's out there playing and moving around. And if you got a game the next day, you're not going to get just completely wasted. But if you're just chilling for 3 months at a time, what's 1 month of just being a degenerate, especially when you have $100 million in the bank?
And he wants to go home to see his family in the winter too, in Venezuela. He's married now for the first time. He got married last year during the season. He got 2 little kids. Wants the little kids to see their grandparents, that kind of thing. He's not at the stage yet where he's going to, like some guys who eventually just move over here and stay in the States, live in Miami, whatever, or wherever they're playing. But
Felix did that.
Yeah, he wants to go home. He's still a homeboy. He lives in a lot of people don't realize this, but Ronald Acuña is kind of an introvert, man. I know he's on the field. He's the total opposite, but he's not like that off the field, man. He's a guy. He's still a homebody. He wants to go home to his family. So do you want him home with his family in Venezuela? Like you said, with all his old buddies and everything, he's got $100 million. You want him just not playing?
Yeah. Or on South Beach.
Or working out like a fiend and playing every day. So anyway, long story short is I think people shouldn't get on him about playing in the offseason. And I'm going back now and looking at his games played because Harold, said that. Played 119 games in 2022, the year after knee surgery. 119. Had an IL stint. Started the year on the IL. And 159 last year. And then in winter ball, he played 21 games, 104 plate appearances. And a year ago, he played 10 games. He had 39 plate appearances. So, I mean, come on. That's not outlandish at all. He led the majors in plate appearances last year, or led the National League, 735. But he's a leadoff guy who plays every day. It's going to happen. And then he had 104 this winter. Is that pushing it? Maybe, but I still don't think that's excessive. If he'd have played all the way through the playoffs, and his team also won the Caribbean World Series, it was hard for him to watch them do it and not go back and play, but he didn't. So he wasn't there for the playoffs, the Caribbean World Series where they won in Miami. He didn't go down there and play. He agreed, not to do it, and he didn't. So I don't think 1 year doing that's I don't think it had anything to do with him getting hurt. But anyway, moving on. There has been like I wrote today, there's been a lot of encouraging things happen with the Braves this spring. None more than Acuña not being seriously injured. But I would list Chris Sale being healthy, because he'd not had a normal offseason since he said 2018 where he's fully healthy, and he has looked terrific. This guy, I mean, you're talking 95, 96 fastball, get it up to 97, devastating slider, got command. He looks great, man. And that could end up being the biggest trade that a team made in the league in the offseason.
Yeah, it's steal too. If he's himself, he doesn't even have to be himself. He has to be 80% of what he's capable of and stay healthy, and it's a steal.
Because they re-upped it 2 years, $38 million. So he's making less than $20 million AAV.
If he had a healthy season, I don't know. It's been a weird market this year. I mean, we haven't really talked about that too much, but Blake Snell's still looking for a job, so I can't say for sure that he's getting 30, 35. But whatever Wheeler just got, I mean,
$40 million a year.
Sale can go up
42.
against Wheeler when he's good. I mean, he's at that level. So 18's a great deal.
Sure. The Braves took a gamble in that he hasn't been healthy, but they knew last year it was a freak injury thing. He had 20 starts last year. They don't need much more than that from him. As long as he's healthy for the postseason, at what they're paying him, they will be thrilled if he can do that and make 20, 25 starts, but be healthy for the postseason. They gave up Vaughn Grissom for him. They didn't want to do that, but Vaughn had no place here. I mean, unless somebody got hurt, he wasn't going to be in the lineup here. So, and by the way, you hate to see it. He got a string growing. He's not going to be he's going to be on the IL to start the season. He was going to be at second base for the Red Sox. So I think the Chris Sale thing, that's huge, obviously, him being healthy, just knock on wood for the Braves. Two is Strider's curveball. I mean, when he said he had the pitch, you wanted to see him. He's throwing that thing now with regularity. And, dude, he is commanding that curveball. You've seen, right? Freeman, the pitching ninja, has posted it. It's not a waste pitch. He's not spiking it. He's throwing it for strikes.
It's unfair to think of him with a third pitch, but it's one of those things that if you just put it in the hitter's head, if you just show them that, it changes their at bat because now they got to respect three pitches. And I would say that, especially there's been some at bats to lefties where he's probably had him beat with his fastball or they're fouling off his fastball and fouling it off, and then he's left the slider in the zone. I remember Bryson Stott at bat that hurt him. The thing about it is when you don't have too much separation, you can have guys that are kind of like slider bat speed. Nobody's ever caught up to Strider's fastball. Like nobody's ever just on time. They have to cheat. And so guys, if they get caught in between, you throw them that slider and it winds up down and in, they can just drop the head on it. But when you take another 5 or 6 or 7 off and they swing over the top. So that third speed is really the big difference. If he hasn't gotten super comfortable with the changeup enough to throw it for strikes and hitters counts, the curveball can be a game changer. And I don't even want to see what kind of strikeout numbers he puts up with that.
Yeah, you're talking about a range of speeds from like 82 to 99.
99. Yeah, 17 miles an hour. 10 is usually where you're getting that back and forth separation. And the slider's right there, upper 80s, low 90s. Then you drop into low 80s too. And you can play a slider and a curveball off each other. They can see breaking ball, but it goes down versus sideways. I mean, there's just you couldn't assume this guy wasn't going to continue to try to get better, but a lot of guys would have been comfy where he's been.
Sure. You led the majors in strikeouts, you know? And were it not for a few bad innings, your ERA would have been low 3s and you would have won a Cy Young.
Yeah. And he could have just said, I'm comfy where I am.
I'll
just stay here, keep doing the same thing I'm doing. And it's just not who he is. He's going to continue to try to get better. And
that's a rare individual.
He might have.
93% of his pitches were fastballs and sliders. So what does he do? He works on a curveball all off season and gets himself in even better condition. I mean, the quads are ridiculous. It's ridiculous. He looks like to me, a bicycle racer, like an Eric Heiden back in the day, those quads. And it just allows him to get so much extension. He's just a freak, man. What this guy does, there's nobody like him in the majors. And now with the curveball, you got him with that curveball. You got Andy still throws the changeup occasionally, but you got Sale with the slider, fastball, and the changeup. These guys know about changing speeds and locating. And if they can keep Sale healthy, you just look at that first 3. When you've got a Charlie Morton as your 4th starter, or Ronaldo Lopez, who looked really good, by the way, in his first couple of outings, you got Ronaldo Lopez, with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball when he wants to throw it that hard, as your 5th starter. And then if you want to move Lopez to the pen,
got 2 guys chomping at the bit.
That was the other thing I was going to say was one of the biggest, most pleasant surprises for the Braves. Oh, I don't know how surprised they are, but it's been huge. Smith-Shawver's improvement since last year. That guy throwing a curveball now, another guy throws upper 90s, and he's out there throwing beautiful curveballs, man. Really impressive what he's done. Curveballs and changeups from Smith-Shawver.
It's kind of similar to Strider, where it's a different reason you can't expect him not to get better, but he's still, we've talked about this before, he's so young, and it only takes one guy suggesting a grip or a visual of how you want the ball to release your hand, something to click, and you got a new pitch. But when I look at this rotation, I mean, it's like you have a lot of different angles too. It's not like you have 3 guys throwing, 95, 97 with similar breaking balls. You got Strider riding the ball, and now he's dropping a curveball off it. So he's playing up and down, off each other, and then a slider going sideways. Then you got Max, who has 4 pitches from the left side, one of the best lefty curveballs in the game. You throw another lefty behind him throwing 97, but he's completely different. It's a low arm angle, and he's playing off that arm angle where it's bearing in on right-handed hitters, so they got to cheat to it. He throws the slider off that. They swing over it. Lefties, it's hell because it's coming from behind him. And then you throw Charlie Morton, and I don't know if anybody's really been like Charlie Morton the last however many years with his spin rate and breaking ball. Like, he can do something not a lot of guys do too. So that's 4 different looks. I haven't seen Lopez throw a lot, but if he's throwing gas, it's like you got your hands full. There's not going to be an easy game.
Smith-Shawver, he was throwing that changeup the other day against the Twins. I think I saw it was 4 of their 9 swings against it they missed. They whiffed. I mean, he was getting strikeouts with that changeup.
And that's the hardest pitch, at least for me. That changeup was hands down the hardest pitch to learn.
That's what I've heard. It's the hardest pitch for generally for pitchers to learn. This is a guy, again, we've talked about this. He's been pitching full-time for 4 years. 4 years.
Yeah. That's nothing.
No, that's like a high school career.
I learned nothing in high school. And that's part of my point too, is like I learned nothing in high school. I learned nothing in rookie ball. I learned nothing in low A. Then I got to A ball, and that's when my stuff wasn't good enough to just ride. I had to learn how to pitch. And so I came up with a cutter and a curveball, and I shot up pretty fast from there. But you have to hit this point where you can't just show up and be better than everybody. And for a guy as talented as Smith Shawver, that level's the big leagues. So now he gets to adjust, but you don't get to adjust in Double A when your fastball is just blowing everybody away and a decent breaking ball strikes everybody out. You know, you have to hit this point where just showing up is not good enough. And I think that was the big leagues for him. It's different for everybody.
The other really big development, encouraging development, I would say, has been Ken Giles. I mean, he's a revelation, dude. This is a guy that has barely pitched for 4 seasons, had Tommy John, a couple other injuries, battled depression, made 9 appearances in a 4-year span, and now he's out there. This is the guy that used to throw 100 mile an hour. His nickname was 100 miles Giles. And now he's throwing mid-90s, but his big pitch is a slider that is devastating. He made guys the other day in his first appearance look silly. The Phillies against his slider. Struck out the side in his first inning with it.
Has he pitched again since then?
He has pitched twice. But this is a guy that he comes as a non-roster invitee to camp. All of a sudden, I've got him on my projected roster that I've got coming out tomorrow, my first roster projection. I've got him on it. And Daysbel Hernandez, who's got options, you start him at AAA. But there's no way, with the way Ken Giles has pitched so far, there's no way I don't want him in my opening day. With his experience, what he can do with that slider, I mean, what he did against the Phillies, and this was against the Phillies studs because it was in a home game. He did against their studs.
Yeah, he threw an inning on March 2nd against Toronto and struck out 1 with a walk.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that the nicest thing when you're getting a guy that's got a significant amount of big league time is you don't have to worry about that deer in the headlights. I'm officially in the big leagues now. You know, when you've been out of the game for a little bit or injured, there's definitely some extra adrenaline, but you've had so much practice, you know, processing that and handling it. You get a guy that with serious major league experience come in and throw like this in spring. You don't have to ask yourself, you know, is he going to be overwhelmed by the level? You already know he can handle it, and that's always nice.
And you talk about hungry, man. I mean, this is a guy that wanted to come back, wanted it bad. And here he is. He's back. He's got the scraggly beard. He looks fearsome out there. And that slider, I know the Phillies weren't expecting it. You got another guy who's got the closing experience and was a damn good closer. So yet another option. Last year when they opened with Iglesias on the IL, remember Mentor had to shoulder that? The only lefty really on the team had to be the closer. This year you've got so many options now.
Giles has 115 saves.
Yeah, and not many blown ones.
Pretty good. I didn't realize he had that many.
Yeah, for a couple of years there, he was an elite closer with the Astros. In the year that when he filled, he would have had more. He filled in that year for Papelbon, and when he did it, it was great. I think he only blew like, 4 out of 35 or something, 39 or something like that. So that's been another really encouraging sign. They really haven't had any setbacks so far. Anybody has come in and been really disappointing, that kind of thing. You know, a couple of the relievers they're not counting on have gotten knocked around, but again, they're not counting on them. So also David Fletcher, here's another guy that I think people probably wrote off when the Braves got him from the Angels. They're like, why'd they get this guy? You know, that was when Alex was shuffling around bad contracts, making it work with Kelenic, getting 5 years of control with Kelenic, and basically taking on other teams' other bad contracts. So he wanted Kerr from the Padres. He took on the bad contracts, a couple of other ones, including Fletcher. He's making $6 million this year and $6.5 million next year. Fletcher has looked really good. He's battled injuries the last few years, including the sports hernia, but he's gotten off to a good start, man, at the plate and in the field. In the field, this guy's really smooth in the field, can really make some plays. So I think all of a sudden you got a couple of nice utility options with him and Guillorme. And I got Snett and Alex taking 2 utility infielders to start the year and 1 extra outfielder with Forrest Wall. None of those outfielders have infield experience. Like last year, Rosario had some. He started out as an infielder. So if you were to have a couple of infielders get dinged up in a game, it'd be nice to have a guy like Fletcher and Guillorme. You can get through a game. And Fletcher, you could stick him in the outfield if you had to, but with Forrest Wall, you're not going to need, I don't think, more than one extra outfielder because your outfielder is going to play every day. Now, if you start to rest Kelenic or you want a platoon, then you can flip that up and send down Fletcher, get rid of him off the roster, or Guillorme if you wanted to, whatever, or bring up another outfielder. But with Forrest Wall's speed, because that's why you had him on as a pinch runner, but now he's showing that he can play because this guy's hitting, he's raking. He made adjustments in the offseason, working with a couple of organizational hitting coaches that went down to his hometown in Florida. He made a great catch today. He can play all three outfield positions. So I think there's your fourth outfielder. And, you don't really need to have a Luke Williams or an Eli White there for speed if you've got Forrest Wall for that. But he can also be your fourth outfielder. He can be a legit outfielder. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But I think Fletcher has thrust himself into that battle for that last roster spot. It's just how they want to go with it, infielder or outfielder.
I mean, you don't have to do as much when you got guaranteed money. You know that. But there's also going to be however many guys at the end of every spring. There's always those roster crunches. And in today's game, it's a lot of times it's quality veterans that, you just don't have a spot for. Or there's some rookie came up and did something and they want to give him the chance. But who knows who's going to be available toward the end of camp too.
Yeah. I mean, Fletcher's played so well that who knows if somebody was desperate, they might even be willing to take on his contract or most of it. But
half, whatever.
It's a lot, but he's played that well so far. It's really early. I know that, but he's looked really good. He's healthy. He's playing really well.
You never know what these guys are playing through either. A lot of times I like the pickups of somebody that had surgery after the season. It tells me they were tough and playing through something. And it's like for me, when I came over to Atlanta, I had a 20-something ERA the season before and just got destroyed. But I was pitching through a herniated disc. And I got there, and I remember Ben Acree, the head clubhouse guy, was like, he told me, after I started having a good season, but he's like, you got here, man. We almost didn't even get you a uniform. Your numbers were so bad. We were just going to give you the minor league stuff. It's kind of hard to judge a guy, but when they have that surgery after the season, it's like maybe that was bothering him since April, and he didn't want to get hurt. He didn't want to be hurt and kind of tried to play through it. Now he's healthy.
Another thing to consider is the Braves are only paying Guillorme 1 year, $1.1 million contract. Now, there's a lot of teams that would take that on for a utility guy. So if it came to that, if Fletcher played great the whole spring and they decided, hey, we got to pay this guy $6 million anyway, who knows, Because Guillorme, if he knew he could play a lot more with another team, he might welcome going to another team because he ain't going to play much here.
It's hard to get too attached in spring training to a team. You're thinking about your career, and you get to know the guys and stuff, and it's great. But if you got a big league opportunity, see you guys,
And he's probably got an opt-out, and they might tell him, hey, look, you're not going to play much here. So you can opt out, and they go with Fletcher with the $6 million they're paying him. So we'll see. But those are the only things, those are the good kind of decisions you make. And instead of having to wonder,
who's number 3 starter?
Yeah, which one of these minor league guys has looked the most ready, like between Dylan Dodd and Schuster to be the 5th starter? Because Ian Anderson and Soroka have fallen on their faces, which is where they were last year. Or which one of these kids between Vaughn Grissom and Shoemake is ready for the shortstop job?
Yeah.
And we hope they're ready. But then screw it, we're going with Arcia. At least we know what we got with him, and he ends up surpassing all expectations of making the All-Star team. But they don't have any decisions like that to make this time around, where they're crossing their fingers and rolling the dice.
That was how when the Acuña thing popped up, I was like, if it's his meniscus or something, it might make the season more interesting. Because I look at this team and it's just I can't imagine them, knock on wood, but having a rough season or having to battle for the division. I think they're just heads and shoulders above the rest of the division. Phillies are good. The Mets spent a lot of money, but they're so good. It's almost like this might make things interesting and more fun to watch for the season. Obviously, you don't want to lose that guy, but I haven't watched or followed or been on any teams that are this set.
I think there's a big drop between the Phillies and the third best, the Mets, whether that's the Mets, it might even be the Marlins. I think there's a big drop off between there. The Braves and the Phillies are the class of the division. I think the Braves and the Dodgers are the class of the league. We'll see. Barring any injuries, I don't see any reason the Braves can't win 100 games again, even with the Phillies being better than they were last year.
And they have the best offense, and it's going to be hard. If Sale's healthy, maybe the best pitching staff.
And Hurston Waldrop, we didn't even mention him. His debut, his Grapefruit League debut, everything as built. He looked like a stud, man. I think we're going to see him by second or third month at the most. The Braves need him to come up and make a start. I think we're going to see him. He looked great. That splitter, that plays. He throws hard. He came out, I think his first pitch was, I think he came out throwing 99 in the first inning. 99.
99 with a split. I think split is probably, not everybody can throw it, but most hitters would agree on that's probably the most devastating pitch in baseball is a very good split. It looks exactly like a fastball and falls off the table.
And you don't see it much anymore. But, man, I remember when Smoltz would throw it. He was unhittable. There were a few guys that threw him back then. Some guys said it's really hard on the elbow, that pitch was hard on the elbow, especially if your hand wasn't.
You got to have big hands in the first place, and then just that squeezing these two fingers together on the ball with them spread out. You're so wide with it, right? You're still squeezing these two fingers toward each other to squeeze the ball, and normally all the pressure is behind it. So it's just a different pressure on all those muscles that flex your fingers deep in your elbow. And that's a main reason why a lot of guys don't go with it, because they can wind up throwing like one of those Vulcan changeups where you kind of have a spread out grip, but it's not as much stress, or just a good changeup and get a very similar effect without the risk. But the guys that are able to do it and tolerate it, Gossman, it's a devastating pitch. You don't even have to have great control with it.
And remember, Pedro was double jointed like everywhere, and he had the long fingers and everything. He could do things with the ball that nobody else could do. But yes, Smoltz had big, strong hands. And, but he had Tommy John.
Is Prime Pedro have you seen a pitcher pitch at a higher level?
No, not than Prime Pedro. Outside Prime Pedro, Prime Maddox, Prime Randy Johnson, Prime Roger Clemens.
Yeah, Clemens split.
And I would throw in there, it wasn't as long a prime, but I would throw Kevin Brown in there. He was unbelievable.
DeGrom.
Oh, yeah, obviously DeGrom. Yeah. It's so recent that you forget DeGrom because it's just now. But yeah, that's the crew. And Scherzer was pretty damn good. Doc Holliday was pretty damn good for a few years. But yeah, you're talking about that 3 or 4 people that Pedro there just for a while. Level. Yeah. Pedro was kind of approaching Sandy Koufax level there for that brief period.
I think Strider can get there too, especially with the curveball.
He can. He's got all the tools, obviously. He's a freak, like we said. The body is he's just different. I mean, the extension he gets and all that. He throws so hard, but he's got the cerebral part of it that a lot of pitchers don't have. Yeah. He's got that Maddox cerebral quality. He gets off on studying pitching and finding out what he can do best, how to generate the most spin and everything, shaping his pitches. He loves that stuff. Whereas a lot of pitchers are like, yeah, I'm going to do it because it's going to help me. He loves it. It's like, yeah. I mean, this guy's a thinker, man. He gets deep into that. As deep as he says, the more information you get, the better. Wherever you can get it, the better on analytics.
Some guys just have an appetite for it. I think you can wear yourself out on the game depending on your personality, but there's certain guys that just cannot get enough. I had to step away from it. I had to get away from it, but the more I thought, the worse I got. But there's guys that are so good at processing information and their field guys. They're the type of guys that finish playing baseball and they go out and they're scratch golfers in like a month, because they just have this addictive personality and they like love making adjustments. Exactly. He's one of those guys. I mean, I'd love to meet him because I feel like I'm pretty right on it. But everything I've seen is he's just one of those guys that anything he does, he's going to go 150% in on and figure it out.
Yeah, he's really different, man. He's really different. He is so cerebral, but yet he's got this great dry a sense of humor and personality. Funny as hell. So it's not like he's just this nerd or he's, Kevin Brown was so intense and he was an a-hole, man. He was great. But this guy's a nice guy and he's funny as hell on top of being, when he gets on the mound, so intense. So he's kind of unique. It's going to be interesting to watch his career. As long as he stays healthy, I don't see him not being the best pitcher in baseball. Eno came out in The Athletic with his power rankings, fantasy rankings, and stuff rankings. And Strider was number 1 in his stuff rankings, and he uses all the analytics, everything. Strider was number 1, and that's
I can tell you that without analytics, just watching it.
yeah, until DeGrom gets healthy again, and I don't see that at this stage of his career. I think DeGrom, we've seen the best of DeGrom, but I think DeGrom's like the only guy in the last 10 years that could be lumped in with Strider when Strider's at his best.
Yeah, and even when you talk about guys like Roy Halladay and these guys, Cliff Lee, that were throwing 200, 250 innings with great numbers and nobody was striking. You just don't see starting pitchers with that ability to strike hitters out like this. And strikeouts aren't everything, but do you get into certain situations in games where you need a strikeout? Guess what? That's just what he does. He doesn't have to try harder or change anything different. He has a swing and miss fastball in the zone. Like
Sale, if you look at Sale's number in that 6-7 year span where he was one of the best 3 pitchers in baseball over that span. You got 2 guys now that have led the majors in strikeouts.
And the best offense in the game.
Along with Max Fried, perennial Cy Young candidate. Charlie Morton, 200 strikeout a year guy. Ronaldo
Sale's
Lopez.
best is 12.9 strikeouts per 9. Strider's got to be
13. 13-1. Yeah, Strider's the best over the last 2 years per 9.
13.5 and 13.8.
Yeah, he's the best.
That's like
insane.
That's a closer for 7 innings.
Sale was still 13-1 last year, right?
I'd have to go back and check. But.
Yeah, Sale's the only guy that's those 2 are up there in the last however many years or all time. Anyway, so you're kind of in that stretch now where the games are, not boring, but the guys are starting to get more ABs, more innings. But in another week or so, then you'll start to see more rounds of cuts. The main guys play more, take a couple more trips, that kind of thing. So this is like another week of games where it's like, but the Braves are still excited because you got some of these things we've been talking about that are new to watch, like Strider with the curveball. It would be the same if he didn't have that, if he's just going out there getting his work in. Or Sale every time he goes out,
Well, you get to get answers.
Or
you
Lopez.
Get to work on that curveball if you're Strider for the whole offseason. But that first one you throw and a hitter swings and misses by a foot, it's like, okay, this plays. So that you get a lot of more value out of spring training, especially as a veteran when you're trying new shit, than you do just showing up and working.
And watching Forrest Wall, man, this guy, wow, talk about revelations. I know it's early, but he looks like a different guy than last year. I mean, he's playing great. Before today, I didn't look, but yesterday he was leading the majors in RBIs of 9, 3 home runs, hitting for power and not striking out. I mean, he's playing great defense. So the work he did in the offseason seems to be paying off. But so you got some guys who's fun to watch and see where they are. It's not just the same team, doing the same things. And Kelenic he's hit some balls hard. He hasn't got a lot of results yet, but he's hit some balls hard to the track, line drives. We'll see. He's got plenty of time to kind of put it together. I'm sure he's pressing a little bit, but you can see him up there. He just looks like a natural in the box. Great swing.
I'd be more worried about him if they didn't already tell him you're our guy. This is the moment that's for when you start off camp. Maybe you're hitting the ball hard, but not getting numbers. This is your chance to not press and stick with hitting the ball hard and knowing it's going to fall in versus be like, shit, I got to make this team. And it'll be the same thing in April if he starts off slow.
Sure. All right, everybody, we appreciate it. And we'll come back and do another show next week. And thanks, everybody, for going to the site. And those of you who bought some stuff and frequent sponsors. And look up our man, Van Gogh Coffee. Get that deal. That sounds like a great deal. Got a mug, free bag of coffee. Do it.
He needs to send us some. I want to try it.
That's joevangogh.com for that deal that I talked about with the free mug and the bag of coffee when you get a 6-month coffee subscription with the Hammer and Hank coffee. All right, that's it. 7:55 forever. We are out. Appreciate it.